myself organized, I have a lot of different things that I do because I think organization is the most important thing in PPC because there's a lot of small tasks that can easily be forgotten about as you focus on more of the larger tasks. So I like to get everything scheduled and organized before I start my month or I start my day. So at the beginning of every month, I have this giant whiteboard, which I use to schedule my more routine tasks that I have. So if I have any client meetings that happen on a regular basis, if there's any tasks that I need to do regularly, maybe once a week, once a month, I'll put them on there so that I don't forget, and that when I'm scheduling things for that month, I know if I have something major to do. I also have a smaller whiteboard, which I use for things that I have to do that day. So maybe not like my broad meetings or broad tasks, but more specific things that I have to do deeper into my account so that I can go through and erase them when I'm done and remember everything that I have to do. So starting out on a typical day, the very first thing I do when I come into the office is check all of my accounts, log into their AdWords accounts, their Ad Center accounts, make sure nothing seems out of place because in one day you can spend a lot of money on one random keyword. So you want to make sure that you're going in there, making sure everything's normal. On Mondays and Thursdays, what we do is we project performance for our accounts so we can kind of see, are we still on track to meet our goals? And that's really helpful, and I recommend everybody do it at least once, maybe twice a week, because then you can go in and say, okay, I did bid changes, have they had an effect? If you're still projected over, you know you need to go in and lower your bids. If you're projected under, you need to go in and increase your bids, and it just helps you keep on top of what you're doing because it can be really easy to get bogged down in tasks. For like one account, maybe you're starting a new account, you kind of forget about your older accounts. So just getting into each of them before you start anything else for the day, making sure that they're on track to meet their goals. That's the most important. So after that, I turn to my list of things to do, and how I prioritize is if there's anything that can be done within a few minutes, so maybe checking email, knowing that I have to send a quick report to a client, if there's anything that will take just a few minutes, I do that right away so I can get it off of my list. Then next I'll go in, and the next priority for me is anything that does deal with the client. So I also run reports that are more in depth on Mondays and Thursdays to send out to the client. So those will be the next things I do. Anything that has to do with someone externally, get that done next. Then if there's anything I need to work with someone here internally, and then anything I need to do that kind of is just on my own. And I like to prioritize it so that, you know, if someone's waiting on you to get something done before they can do something else, get those done first so that you don't, throw them off track for their day. Okay, so after I get everything done that either has to be done with someone externally or internally, then I'll start on my daily tasks. And those are also planned out ahead of time as well. I never come in to work without knowing what I have to do for the day. And something I got when I started working in PPC that I think is extremely useful is kind of a PPC task schedule list. And it was passed down, from generation to generation in the PPC world, but it really helps me remember when I'm planning out my daily tasks what I need to do and kind of how often I need to do it. And how it's laid out here is kind of specific, like do this once every 2 weeks, do this once every month. But once I get into my accounts and more familiar with them, then you'll know, maybe I have to do an SQR every week because either it's a new account or it gets a ton of traffic or it targets a lot of broad keywords, or maybe it's an account that's been around for a while, it's very targeted keywords, maybe you only have to do an SQR once every 2 weeks, maybe once a month. So you can kind of adjust it on that, but I always pull out this list at the beginning of the month to go through and make sure that I have all the tasks I should be doing just for general maintenance on my accounts on my schedule. And what I use to create my schedule is Basecamp, and I recommend using any program or even just an Excel spreadsheet and putting them into whatever program it is so that you have a reminder when you sit down and you look, okay, these are the things that I have to do today. And what I used to do is I used to schedule everything to be done at the end of the week. So I would put the due date as Friday and then kind of go through it as I needed to do it. But I found that didn't work for me because if something came up, then I would say, oh, I can just push this back, and then everything would get pushed back to Friday. So it helps if you do set a harder deadline. So I want to do bid changes, I want to do them on Monday. Put that in there, mark it off so that you know, yes, it's that day, and you don't feel like you can push it off until later. So after that, just if anything out of the blue comes up, which actually does happen very often, that all of a sudden, you get a call from a client, or you just go into an account and you realize, oh my gosh, things have just gone totally crazy. Thankfully, it doesn't happen as often as it could, like every day, but if that ever does come up, then that's also my first priority as well. Everything else kind of gets pushed to the side if something like that happens, but for the most part, I think organization is key, so that when things do happen that are unscheduled and you're unprepared for, if you're organized, then it helps keep kind of everything a little more calm.
So I would say that there are probably a million different ways you could determine the best time to do all your specific PPC tasks in any particular month. So the way I like to keep things organized from month to month is I make one calendar. This is sort of an example of what I use, and instead of having to worry about when I typically do search query reports, bid changes, ad reviews, things like that, I use the same calendar from month to month and just change it from like July to August, so that I keep everything spaced out evenly, and then that way I also don't forget to do the things that sometimes become monotonous and tend to fall by the wayside in my accounts, to keep them as healthy as possible. So I like to keep everything spread out. I like to make sure I turn everything back on at the beginning of the month that I maybe turned off through the month for poor performance, and I keep notes of all of that on my calendars, so that way I don't forget anything.
In the first week, this is kind of just assuming that you have a client who has a monthly budget that is set for each month and isn't kind of just like rolling over a longer time period. But for any client who has a budget that is either known or pretty consistent, and for an account that has pretty consistent performance, and that you can determine what's probably going to work and what's probably not, and its history decently well, at the beginning of the month I try to just prep the account so that it will run to its budget and lead or revenue or whatever goals that it's trying to reach. So that's the ideal situation, if you know what your budget and goals are, and if you know how your account's going to behave. That's not always going to be the case, of course, but that's ideally what I like to do at the very beginning of the month, or even in advance of the beginning of the month if I can, so that things are just running correctly from the start. And then, because a lot of the clients that we have budgets that are set for each month, and it's kind of easier to present new things to try, like new experiments or expansions that you want to make as experiments that span the course of a month, it's sometimes better to start the experiments at the beginning of the month so that you can gather as much data as you can before you need to turn the experiment off. That could be different, because obviously if the experiment can span a longer distance, you can start whenever you want, but it's sometimes a nice time to begin experiments as well. I think that's probably it. And then of course there's reporting. You're probably always going to have to report in the first week of the month, because that is when you're going to have data from the last week of the last month. So just get that done ASAP, set the account up for success for the beginning of the month, and then just start optimizing from there. In week 2, usually, I guess unless you had a really high volume account, it's probably when you have good data to optimize on regarding how your account is performing for that month. I forgot to say, and I'm sorry, I'm going to say it because I think it's important, that in week 1 or in advance of the month, if your account has like a lot of seasonality, or you are planning for holidays or any kind of season that's coming up, you should make sure that you have the account all set up for that as well. But that's not really a monthly thing. It's more like in advance of the holiday or the season, whenever that happens to fall. So, and then your whole strategy for the entire month should be guided by a strategy that spans the course of longer than a month. I mean, all of these monthly plans and weekly plans should fit into a plan that spans a larger time period. Whether that is 6 months or a year or whatever for your client, it's going to depend on what their goals are and how far in the future they're willing to kind of forecast and make a plan. But it really should never be month to month, because that's not really going to get you any kind of a plan that's going to give you any kind of account progress. It's just going to be constantly trying to meet the same consistent goals when you could be growing the account instead. So anyway, let's go back to week 2. That's when you can, I think, generally really start doing more optimizations that account for performance of the account that month, just like bid changes, ad text changes, all the normal stuff that you do, placement reviews and stuff like that. And then you can start seeing the performance of any experiments you started as well. And then just kind of start reporting to the client on where you are in terms of reaching goal metrics, how far you are away. If you are running well, but you need more budget, maybe they're willing to give you more because you're performing well, and letting them know about that stuff at that time. In week 3, obviously you have to start the same thing, like continue doing the same things, but you'll probably have a decent idea of whether you're going to come in near your goal or not at that point. If you are, like, that's great, things just continue on. Maybe you have a little bit of free time to start setting up stuff for the next month in terms of if you wanted to start new campaigns or do some new research or anything that you kind of have a hard time fitting into your time. If things are running really well and you're meeting your goals in week 3, it's a nice time to start setting all that up so it's just ready for the beginning of the next month. But if it's not, then that kind of sucks, and you get to spend a lot of time in your account doing some analysis of why it's not working, what used to work, what you can add or turn off or bid up or bid down or take away to make it closer to goal metrics or hopefully reach them. And then also you need to be in communication with the client about that at that time, just so they know what to expect. And then week 4, generally I find myself having to track budget fairly carefully because generally if you've spent your budget correctly, you'll be near it at the end of the month, and you just want to make sure that fluctuations don't happen to get you way overspend at the end of the month, and continue the same type of bid changing, keyword and display review, ad review stuff that you always do. And then if you have any reporting that you can get done before the beginning of the month, like about strategies that you've tried that month or new experiments you turned on, or just any standard reporting that doesn't require a full month of data, getting started on that in week 4 is also nice so that you don't have to do that all in week 1 when you're trying to make sure the account runs well for the entire next month. So that is basically all I've got.